Imagine this. You get accepted into a new regional chain. Hooray! Now, the race to drive velocity begins, but awareness plays are so expensive. Demos, displays, coupon programs, the list goes on. But what if there was a way to connect with millennial women, some of the most important shoppers out there, to actually go into the store, buy your product, and then post about it to their trusted friends and neighbors? Well, now there is. Meet Hummingbirds, the new platform that connects your brands with real shoppers in a specific city. Hummingbirds lets you set up your campaign, match with the local birds who are interested, and then track the social impact of the campaign. It's such a cool concept to hear about a product from someone from my own community that I know and trust rather than some big-time influencer who might not even be relevant in certain zip codes. To learn more, check out hummingbirds.com/startupcpg, and you can even register for a chance to win a free custom managed program. Terms and conditions apply. Please visit the website for details. Good luck.
I love getting those juicy insights that can have a real meaningful impact on decisions made for brands. It is always amazing to hear the voice of the customer, especially as a founder, folks who create something from scratch. They have a vision, they have an idea. Oftentimes it's this amazing thing and they get quite far just based on their own gut instinct. And that's where I might be able to help out, or the work getting insights is really where you can tap into those broader perspectives that will help you grow your brand and scale.
Hello, my dear CPGers. Today's topic nerds out into one of my favorite areas of CPG, which is consumer insights. Not everybody knows you don't need to be a billion-dollar brand to do great research. There are plenty of ways to do it that are cheap and cheerful, as told by today's guest, Sara Schor, who has tons of experience running qualitative studies, both in person as a focus group facilitator and also online through bulletin boards that you'll learn all about. In today's episode, we talk a lot about the different research methods, how to set your objectives, and we even get pretty in-depth talking about sample questions and ways you can interpret the data. It's truly a DIY consumer insights dream, but if you want to also get in touch with Sara for some help, you can email her at Sara, that's Sara, at shorinsights.com, Schor, which is SCHOR, insights.com. Enjoy. Welcome to the Startup CPG Podcast. I've got a really cool guest for you today. It's Sara Schor. Sara is the principal of Schor Insights Strategy, which is a boutique agency specializing in consumer insights and brand strategy. I've worked with Sara before. It's so interesting, her expertise. So she works with big and small companies, startups, nonprofit agencies, kind of whatever, anybody who is interested in learning more about consumers and their consumers. I wanted to bring Sara on the podcast today because I consider myself a consumer insights expert, but she knows a million more than I do about consumer insights. So, for example, how to actually run your own focus group and really go deep, especially on qualitative insights. So, Sara, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. I appreciate you taking the time and sharing all your knowledge with us.
Fantastic. Thanks, Daniel. Good to see you.
Yes, likewise. So the last time you and I talked, I think it was because I was trying to figure out for a beverage brand that I was launching how to just get some insights kind of on the cheap. I was, I've run plenty of quantitative studies, like just trying to run surveys online and get info that way. But actually, so it was in the energy category, and I was never an energy drinker. Like I just had been kind of always coffee. And so I felt like I didn't know the first thing about who drinks energy drinks and why. And I was just so interested in really trying to get a bit of a baseline in, maybe not a method that would be peer-reviewed scientific journal level, but at least good enough where I could feel like I was getting, high confidence, accurate feedback from people. And so I was so impressed when I reached out and asked you for some tips on how to do it myself and some of the resources that you knew about, that I feel like every founder just starting the journey should have the same chance to hear about that stuff from you. So maybe just to start the journey, can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do.
Sure. Yeah. So, I've spent a career in marketing, and I've spent about the last 20 years in consumer insights and brand strategy. About 7.5 years ago now, I founded Schor Insights and Strategy with a real focus on consumer insights. I love getting those juicy insights that can have a real meaningful impact on decisions made for brands. It is always amazing to hear the voice of the customer, especially as a founder. Folks who create something from scratch, they have a vision, they have an idea. Oftentimes it's this amazing thing, and they get quite far just based on their own gut instinct. But then there comes this point where they start to scale, and it needs to go beyond a niche audience. It needs to speak to larger retailers, for example. And sometimes at that point, you need to start making decisions, whether it's around packaging or around messaging or around flavor expansion, around prioritization of benefits, that your gut no longer is enough, especially as you're starting to reach people who may not necessarily be like you and have the same needs as you. And that's where I might be able to help out, or the work getting insights is really where you can tap into those broader perspectives that will help you grow your brand and scale.
Okay, awesome. Maybe just before we kind of get into all of the overview of it in theory, could you give just a quick example of like one project that you've done that you thought was particularly helpful for an early brand? And you don't have to give the name, but you can, at least describe it and talk about the impact.
Oh, sure. So I was working on a coffee-based energy drink, and they were doing really well at first. And they got to this point that their packaging wasn't terribly good, their naming wasn't terribly good, and while they knew what their product was and they knew what their intention was, they weren't really sure how to package it and message it for a broader audience. And so we did some research. At that point, they had gotten just a little bit of funding, so they were able to do, what I would call a proper research study, where we recruited people who they felt might be their potential audience. And we went out of our way to understand, what is it about the product that's appealing? How do we think about prioritizing the benefits? And interestingly, so with this one, it was really more of a messaging exercise. And we worked with consumers and also internally talking to the stakeholders and really understanding, what is it about their vision? What is it about what they believe? What is it about the way that they're approaching the category that's really differentiated? And based on all of those inputs, we created a brand strategy that has pretty much defined not just their marketing, but really defined their entire, their investor storytelling and their entire point of view around the category.
That's super cool. And so were you showing it to consumers in person? Was it all done online? How did that happen?
Yeah, a lot of research happens online now, and that was a huge shift that happened during and after the pandemic. But I think what people have realized is that you can do online research in a way that's really effective, and on a way that doesn't make you have to fly somewhere. And in-person research is pretty expensive, and it's also really inefficient. There is a time and a place and a reason to be in person. But this was an online bulletin board, which is a methodology that I use a lot. It is this amazing asynchronous methodology where we post some questions and consumers come in at their convenience and they answer the questions. And of course, you'll always get more participation if people find it convenient. And then you can go in and probe them.
So it's like an online survey that they're going to fill out.
I wouldn't call it a survey because it is still a qualitative methodology, and we can back up and talk a little bit about qualitative versus quantitative, when we get into it. But it's more of what I would call more of a discussion board, because people are coming in, they're asking open-ended questions, they're answering open-ended questions. They might be responding to visuals that we post. We can even have them go onto the internet and pull pictures that, remind them of a brand, that talk about the benefits, and then we can go in and probe.
Okay. And sounds like obviously you would have space for them to give video responses and watch stuff. So maybe like a like a way more interactive and qualitative than version of a survey.
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in the online bulletin board. The methodology, the platform that I use is called Recollective, but you also have one called Qualboard. You have one called D-Scout. There's a whole bunch of them out there, but they're quite easy and, sort of on the more cheap and cheerful side. I think if you're being very, very scrappy, you absolutely could use like a Google Forms for something like this. Obviously, you don't get that back and forth. But there are opportunities to do more open-ended, insight-based studies that don't involve a focus group.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so that's very helpful. Now let's back it up and go from, okay, what is qualitative versus quantitative research, and, what might each be good for an early brand?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So I'm actually even going to back up one more, because qualitative and quantitative are primary research. But there are lots of ways, you talked about, Daniel, some of your needs when you were in the energy category is people all of a sudden like, oh my God, I need to do some research. And there's lots of different types of research. So there's primary researches, which is qualitative and quantitative. Let's park that for a second. There also are a ton of companies that actually do secondary research. Mintel is a really good one that comes to mind, where you can get just amazing input on who the consumers are of the category, who the key competitors are. They have so much data. And that is a great way to get really quickly up to speed. The other thing is, don't discount the power of observation. I remember, this was years and years and years ago, but I spent 3 days standing in a Nike store, just watching people shop. And besides the fact that it was unbelievably boring and my feet were really hurting, it was just an amazing way. You could get so many insights around how people shop a store, how they're making decisions without ever talking to a single person.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when you think up in the CPG world, it's just standing in the aisle.
I love shopper stalking. Like if someone buys a product, like, hello, why'd you buy that? Do you mind telling me? I'm a stranger, but I'd like to talk to you. I'm a big fan. Yeah. Usually people are happy to talk to you about themselves. So that often goes pretty well. I like also that you mentioned Mintel. Yeah, those reports are pretty good. I always wish that they actually tied them to sales data, because they'll talk a lot about like what new products and stuff, but they never really tell you which ones are being successful. But it is cool to just see all the stuff that's out there in different categories. Those reports can be a little expensive. I think like kind of 4K range last time I heard. But I also heard once upon a time somebody had an intern that was a student and they had access to all of them. So,
Right. And if you have friends, for example, that work on a larger company, so larger companies oftentimes have access.
Yeah.
And I imagine they're willing to make a deal with someone who is, in the business. And then the thing I would say is also, Google Analytics are a thing. I find it can be helpful for that first start. Mm-hmm. For a question that you asked, Daniel, like, oh, who's buying energy drinks? For you to do primary research to try and learn that's just a huge study. That's definitely where a secondary research, and I know it sounds crazy, but like internet stalking, there is so much data out there.
Oh yeah, for sure. What's not bad also is Statista, where you can get a subscription.
Yes, Statista's great.
Like the stuff will always be a year or two old, but sometimes that's going to be totally fine to get you up to speed. And I've used plenty of stuff from there and investor decks. And yeah, the in-person stuff, totally agree also. That would be kind of my first step, is go and take a bunch of pictures in stores and then like, draw insights like different channels. And it would even, in energy, it was so interesting to me because I was not really an energy drinker, of just like, obviously, Red Bull and Monster, like number 1 and 2 in that category. And just some of the assumptions you might make when you're considering your own ingredients about like things like caffeine. But, for me, I would see somebody drinking a Red Bull and I would turn to them and say, like, well, why do you drink that? And they might say like, oh, like energy or charge, I don't know, something. And then you'd say, why do you think it gives you energy? And I was floored how many of them didn't know that it had caffeine in it even.
Oh, totally.
They're like, I don't know, maybe sugar, or I don't know, there's like the bull stuff in there or whatever. But even like, you're like, no, that's a caffeine-based energy drink. Like actually a lot of people don't know that. They just know it's the thing that, keeps them up or gives them energy.
Yeah, I would definitely, the advice I like one piece of advice, and of course I'll be full of advice because that's just how I roll. But, if you are a founder in a CPG business and you want to have interactions like that, whether it's in the store, even though store managers don't quite love it, you can get away with it. Have like $10 gift cards on you.
Oh, smart.
People, or even like a $5, a Starbucks card or a $5 DoorDashy thing, or just something of value to be like, hey, I have this $5 gift card. Would you give me 5 minutes of your time? That's great when you're in a store. It's great when you're out in the world. And, people are generous with their time. They're even more generous when they're being incentivized.
That makes sense. I've never tried that. I've just tried giving them the awkward smile, like, can I ask you a couple questions? I'm sorry. But I don't know. People always think it's kind of cool if you're like, I actually am starting a brand. People love Shark Tank. They don't always get to meet founders. But I love that idea about the gift cards also. So yeah, I love all those methods that you're suggesting for getting familiar with the category and consumers, and just like really taking the time to just ask people questions with no assumptions at all, and understand like, okay, where do you buy stuff? Why do you buy it? When do you buy it? When do you drink it? Why do you drink it? What do you drink it with? Right? What else? If you don't have it, what are you drinking then? It's so interesting. Okay. So
you brought up a really important point, is that if you are going to do something like that, as the sort of quote unquote facilitator of the conversation, you need to come at it from a very uninformed perspective and from unbelievable curiosity. No one cares about your category in the same way that you do. No one understands your category in the same way that you do. And you really need to start. I like, when I do moderator training, I always say you need to just be uncommonly curious about even the most obvious things in the world.
Yeah. I one thing that always stuck with me, I remember, is you were giving me some advice on how to ask a question to get to what someone would really say. And I think what you said is ask it this way. Say, suppose an alien came down to Earth and had never seen anything in this world or product category before. How would you describe this product that I'm showing you to them?
Absolutely. So I love that you remember that. I will tell you, almost every research project I do, I always include Zoe from Mars. So Zoe is my new friend from Mars. She just arrived here. I've done it as weird as like, tell her what an olive is. I've done it as weird as that. Or, hey, you're a big NCIS watcher. Tell Zoe why she would want to watch this show. And it really just gets people down to sort of the things that no one thinks you need to explain, but really helps people think about, okay, what exactly is an olive? Why exactly how would I describe the taste of an olive to someone who's never even heard of an olive before? And it's, and you think especially in some of the categories like energy drinks or protein bars, where there's just so much innovation. There's this sort of unspoken language around it. And I think when you get people to speak to that language is really where the more motivational insights are going to come out.
Yeah. I'm remembering all sorts of things where if you don't get to that level, there are a lot of assumptions you don't unpack. I remember like when I worked at Just Egg, Hampton Creek, had been called before. We had a vegan mayo product, and they had been sued at one point by Unilever for saying you can't call it mayo because it doesn't have eggs, and doesn't everyone know that mayo has eggs? And just for me, then it's such an interesting question of like, if you ask somebody what mayo is, do they say eggs or not? And then I think similarly, I was talking to somebody about like, when you have a drink and it says 0, what does that mean? And some people be like 0 sugar. Like, no, it means 0 calories. Well, those are two different things that sometimes intersect, but more often don't. So pretty interesting just when you start digging in like that. So, okay. So to back up, we were talking about like, what are the kind of things you should understand about consumers and like how they interact with products, what's going on in your category. So I think those were some awesome initial sources and ways to think about it. And then now are we getting into like, okay, let's say you want to go a little bit deeper into thinking about like qualitative and quantitative stuff?
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about that. So, what I'm going to say is when you start with research, you always need to start thinking about what are my business objectives and what am I going to do with the information that comes out of it? You should start with that. A lot of people start with, I want to learn blank. And when you say, I want to learn blank, that kind of just sort of sets you up for a bunch of questions that aren't necessarily going to drive action. So I would always start with, what are the research objectives? The business objectives, and what are you going to do with the data? And then you have the challenging task of figuring out, okay, what is the right methodology? And there are lots and lots of ways to go about it. So let's start about the basic methodologies, and that's qualitative versus quantitative. And if people don't know the difference, the thing I would say is quantitative has an N in it. N is for numbers. So quantitative is when you get data. It is what we would commonly call a survey. So that is when, what to know about quantitative is quantitative tends to be, closed-ended, meaning on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is, this is very appealing. 1, this isn't appealing. How appealing do you find this idea? Or, here are 5 flavors. Rank them in the order that you find interesting for you. Quantitative is about larger sample sizes. It is about validation. It is about finding data, and it's about finding proof. Quantitative is not for the why and the tell me about your life and the help me understand, right? Your discussion, if you will, within quantitative is about very much closed-ended. You might put a verbatim there where, you chose concept B as your favorite. Tell me why. Yes, you can get those. In general, verbatims seem to be pretty bad. People don't write terribly thoughtful statements with verbatims. And also people tend to do quantitative surveys on their phone. And as you know, when people are writing something on their phone, it tends to be quite shorthand.
That makes okay. So maybe qualitative, I don't know. I'm just remembering watching on Mad Men when they would do the focus groups, and then you would see some aha moment where the insight came out because it's oh, she uses the product this way, or this is the need that she has that you wouldn't maybe uncover through a survey. Does that happen a lot?
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So I would say qualitative, which is much more smaller sample size, more open-ended. It's more about probing. That's more about getting those juicy ahas, those big insights. That's, oh, that's interesting. You shop at Costco. Tell me why Costco is the right choice for you. Or what about Costco makes it the right, what about Costco is good for your family? Or, hey, so let's imagine you were going to go shopping for snack food. Tell me all of the things that you would be putting in your cart. Okay, great. Now talk to me a little bit. Great. That's interesting. You chose Doritos and Oreos. That's interesting. They feel really different. Tell me about how those fit into your snacking routine. That is a very qualitative conversation. Now you could get some of those quantitatively. What you could say, listen, below is a list of 15 snack items. Which one of them would go into your cart? But again, that's much more about validation. And my question would be well, what would you do with that? And how might that inform at the end of the day, what you're doing if you're trying to launch a CPG project?
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. I've done quantitative stuff myself on pricing studies where I wanted to create a digital shelf and then change the price without people really understanding what was happening and have them tell me their purchase intent. And, quantitative was pretty cool for that because I could just run it to 1,000 people. I could filter it by what shops they typically go to, how aggressively they shop the category in general. So I needed that numerical output to then try to quantify, price elasticity of demand, that kind of stuff. But never, I don't know. I think I just never really had the knowledge of how to do a qualitative one in the same way. But I wish that I had. So I'm glad we're having this conversation.
Good. So to your point, Daniel, I want to mention that you talked about 1,000 people. And the thing with quantitative is the whole idea of quantitative is getting a percentage of, 42% of people agree or 67% of people pick strawberry. It is important that you have a larger sample size because, you may have heard words in, if you had to take a statistics class, in your life, or if you watched anything terribly geeky, you might hear about statistical significance. Otherwise, we might call it projectability. So meaning, if I were to look at the world, this is how the world would act. You do, if you're going to do quantitative, you do need a robust sample size. So my rule of thumb on that one is you kind of want at least 75 people. That's like your absolute minimum to be able to feel good about that. 42% is like a number that could be projectable rather than just sort of a random result coming from a smaller group of people. I prefer 100. I think 125 is even better. But what I see people sometimes doing quantitative and like the sample size is like 48. And it's like, sure, you can use that directionally. But I wouldn't spend money against it is what I like to tell my clients.
Yeah, especially if you're trying to decide between two options. Then, I mean, yeah, if they like one could come up as, I don't know, 10% greater than the other, but at a small sample size, it wouldn't be statistically significant, the difference. So I think that's a great point. So then qualitative, kind of like the opposite of that. I mean, yeah, you're not trying to get that kind of hard number to make a decision on, but you're really interested in the details and the why and and the words they're choosing and how they're interacting. And so like with that bulletin board you mentioned then, so you can record the responses and everybody can kind of go in and watch them, like different people on the team could go and rewatch them.
Yeah. So if we think about the different methodologies for qualitative, right? There's what everybody would heard, there's the online bulletin board, which I mentioned. There's also focus groups, which of course everyone's heard of, or at least seen in a television show, that when you go in person in some like sort of sad little room and there's like a mirror and there's people behind it. There's also online focus groups. I think that online focus groups are a necessary evil. My experience with them is you kind of get the worst of online and the worst of focus groups. But they're an inexpensive way to get perspective from a number of people. And you could just use your Zoom account or your Meet account.
The worst of focus groups, meaning like just people who want to make some money and they don't care about what it is that they're talking about, or what would it be?
Yeah, no, good question. The worst of focus group, meaning groupthink is real. So meaning if I say, so Daniel, talk to me about whether or not this product would be relevant for your life. And you say, oh, this product sucks and I would never use this and I don't get it. And if someone else was thinking, oh, I thought it was pretty darn good, their perspective might be colored. Now there are ways to moderate around that, but at the end of the day, you do still have a number of people listening to each other. People are naturally not wanting to create waves, especially when they're getting paid. So you get the problems of groupthink. And then there's also sort of the problems of focus groups. It's, people are like, well, I signed up for 2 to 3:30, but I can no longer do it. So you've got no-show issues. And then also it's just like a fundamentally unnatural process to sit around and like look at real world things outside of a real world context. And then at the end of the day, like, even though those of us who use the computer for a living, like we all have really good internet speeds, most people don't. Most people have really bad lighting. Most people have noisy dogs or noisy children, and it just makes it hard to do it. And then there's sort of, shop-alongs, going shopping with people, and then one-on-one interviews, which is really important. I think, if you're doing, let's say, like a pharmaceutical, or if you're doing something that's very, there's a lot of innovation right now in feminine hygiene, right? That might not be something you want to do in a large group setting. That might be more of a one-on-one or a more anonymous online setting. So you have to choose, obviously, the methodology. My rule of thumb is I like to use groups, when it's a really difficult strategic proposition that people would have a lot of questions about. So you have that synchronous back and forth. I like to do one-on-ones if it's, something really intimate or you really need to get to know that particular human. And focus groups are also really good for, like, let's say you're testing packaging. That's kind of a great way because you can really understand what it is and what it doesn't that resonates. And then I kind of think online bulletin boards can do almost everything else. And they're so efficient and they're so, inexpensive with a lowercase I. Obviously, if you're on a startup budget, it's everything, it costs money. But, compared to like conducting a focus group.
We'll be right back. Hey friends, inventory management can be a major pain. Keeping track of all your ingredients, your inventory across warehouses and co-mans, your retail and e-com orders, and tying all of that together. When your Excel spreadsheet breaks, check out our friends at Sin7 Core, our inventory management software partner. You can track everything you make and sell, and as the leading tool for early CPG brands, it integrates with all the major software like QuickBooks, Shopify, Amazon, and whatever your warehouse and co-mans are using. Through Startup CPG, you get a free month trial and then 50% off the 3 months after that. To get started, check out sin7.com/startupcpg. That's Sin, C-I-N, like the first 3 letters in Cincinnati, and the number 7. So sin7.com/startupcpg. Back to the show. Okay, so those are some of the hows. And then can you remind me then, just to summarize, what are all the kinds of projects or questions or deliverables that you would be like? What are all the different kinds of qualitative then that one can do or that you typically are doing for brands?
Yeah. So, I use all of those platforms, and I tend to use qualitative, everything from, hey, from a product perspective, we are thinking, I'll give you a great example of this one. So, I spent a lot of time working with ESPN on their women's properties, and about, it's almost 18 years ago. And then the client said, hey, we think there's something for women. And so we went into the marketplace and we did some one-on-ones, we did some focus groups, really understanding the different ways that women fan and the different ways that women relate to sports. And, the output of something like that would be, hey, here are all of the opportunities. Here are all the attitudes women have around sports. Here's the way women fan. Here's how fandom exists within women's lives. And then I was working on I guess this would be a baked good CPG brand. And they were looking to change their packaging and they were looking to do some innovation. So we did an online bulletin board and we actually sent them the product. And we had people and it was an unbranded box. We had people unpack it and talk about what it looked like and what they expected the product to taste like. Then we had them taste it and we had them talk about, what it was, what it reminded of them, when would they use it. Then we asked them to use it over the course of several days, and we wanted to understand what occasions it existed in. So you can really do anything. It always comes back to, what are your business objectives and what do you need this input to help you decide? Right? I am a very big believer that there's no reason ever to do research unless you're going to act on the insights that you get from it. And so the question is, what are you looking? Are you looking to define flavors? Are you looking to figure out how to message your product? Are you looking to figure out what consumers see the benefits are? You always have to start with that.
Okay, got it. So then back to the example for the coffee-based energy one, for example.
Yeah.
So how did you actually conduct it? How many people were you getting? How did you recruit them? How did you actually set the thing up? Let's get into it.
Yeah. And keep in mind, I'm going to talk at the sort of not startup level now, and then we can talk about ways to make it more cheap and cheerful.
Perfect.
All right. So
I love cheap and cheerful is great.
Yeah. Cheap and cheerful. Absolutely. So we had decided on the platform, and the reason we started on the online bulletin boards, I think actually the client even came and said, I want to do some focus groups. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about really what you need. Because I always, I want people to spend their money well, no matter how big of a client they are. Let's not spend money just for the sake of spending it. So we decided to do an online bulletin board, and we determined who the audience was. And what I mean by who they are, we talked about their demographics, age, gender, affluence, ethnicity. Sometimes you need people with kids. Sometimes you need people without kids. Then we looked at what their attitudes were. So we were looking at people who felt like who used energy products, who had energy-based needs. And then we also looked at, behaviors. These are people who purchase at C-stores. These are people who can't remember exactly what they were, but you want to think about your audience that you recruit for qualitative and even for quantitative as well, is you want to think about it from a demographic perspective, from an attitudinal perspective, and from a behavioral perspective. You don't want to get too narrow because obviously you don't want to market to a teeny tiny narrow audience. And also the more narrow the specifications are, the more expensive your sample will be. But we've created a screener, worked with a recruiter. Recruiters are folks who have panels of people who have signed up to do research. We give them our screener. They send it out in the form of a quantitative survey to their sample. Then they find people and the people get qualified. And then they get invited in to participate in the research. I'm a big believer if you're going to spend the money to do it. Now, granted, it is expensive to get people, but if you're going to spend the money on the platform and if you're going to kind of bother doing it, my sort of rule of thumb is a minimum of 15. I think 15 and 25, and I'm talking with an online bulletin board, that feels right to me. You could also do focus groups, 4 groups, recruit 6 people, or 6 groups, recruit 5 or 6 people. You definitely with qualitative kind of get sort of probably the only things I remember from college from an economics class, the law of declining returns. There comes to a point where you just start to hear the same things over and over. On the other hand, I would never say do like 2 focus groups because the people that you get in there you want to make the whole idea of qualitative and insight work is to hear patterns, is to see themes, is to connect the dots. And if you don't give yourself the opportunity to sort of get a greater volume of inputs to help you see those themes, you'll be making decisions based on just some people who may or may not be your target audience. The way to do something like that, so recruiting is expensive. There are more cheap and cheerful ways to do it. There are some companies. One that comes to mind is called respondent.io. There's another one called DScout. Those are organizations that have panels, digital panels, and you can recruit people in a very DIY manner. And then you use their platform to actually conduct the research. It is a great way to do it if you're wanting to cut costs and wanting to cut time. The one thing I will say in general is that sample for qualitative and quantitative is becoming more and more problematic. You have bot issues, you have AI issues, you have people who just are kind of doing it for the money. So you do lose a little bit of that quality control, but it is a great way to get sample. Another way to get sample, which I use very, very frequently when I work with startups, is friends of friends. So example, I was working with a client that was coming out with a new compression sock. We sent myself and a bunch of the folks that we sent out emails. We put together a little survey, a little 1-minute survey using my personal Question Pro. You could use SurveyMonkey, you could use Qualtrics, you could use Google Forms if you want to say, hey, we're doing some research and I want to see if you can participate. If you are someone who is, qualifies, and then you ask questions like age, all of the demographic stuff. And then in this particular one, I asked people, which of the following products would you never buy? And I included compression socks in there because I wanted to make sure I had non-rejectors. And then you get that data and you manually recruit people. It's a lot of work, but it saves a ton of time, a ton of money, and a ton of time. I would not suggest, even though it's real easy, I would not suggest using social. I did once where I tried to do this and I said, you could participate in paid research. And I was like, wow, I'm getting thousands of responses. And I was getting thousands of responses because they were all fake responses.
Oh, interesting. Like when you post a job on LinkedIn without putting any kind of criteria in there, you just get like whatever, just like an onslaught.
Yeah. And the other way to do it that's a little bit more cheap and cheerful is that if you happen to have a database, you can also send out this kind of recruiting survey to your database. Like, hey, we're thinking about doing some research. Can you fill out these questions to see if you can participate? Those are sort of the more scrappy ways to find respondents. One thing I would say is you can always use your friends. Just make sure your friends are reflective of the target audience that you're creating for. So obviously, if you're creating a product that is for parents, lower middle class parents with young kids, don't talk to your friends in New York City.
Okay, makes sense. So, and then when you were creating the bulletin board, for example, then like, what does it actually look like? What are you loading in there?
Yeah. So The discussion guide. And so we can talk a little bit about some rules of thumb around moderating. The most important thing in qualitative research is to ask good questions well. And then I would say also is to listen superbly. And what I mean by listening superbly is you have to get rid of everything that you think. You have to get rid of any judgment. You have to get rid of looking for the answer because people are very good at being people who buy products. They're not good at being marketers or entrepreneurs of CPG products. And when I talk about asking good questions well, if you ask a yes, no question, you will get a yes, no answer. If you ask somebody 3 questions at a time, when you think about health food, what comes to mind? Do you consider salads? Do you consider this? You will confuse the hell out of people. And I always say, stay as unaided as you possibly can. What I mean by that is, what does it mean to you to have a healthy diet? Then you could say, or what does it mean to you to live a healthy lifestyle? Great. Talk to me about what it means to to have a healthy diet. Then you can start getting more narrow. To what degree, if at all, do smoothies play a part of their healthy diet? Okay. And then you can say, if I had a smoothie that had probiotics and kale in it, would that be part, so you want to get as unaided as possible to get those insights. And while it might be frustrating because you want to get to your product right away and your idea right away, it's those more general, bigger, more unaided perspectives that first of all, put people into context, but also give you insights beyond what do people think of my product? So I always start that. In terms of writing a discussion guide, sort of rule of thumb is start with welcome and introductions. You so want to get into your questions right away, but let people introduce themselves. And this is particularly important when you're doing it one-on-one, but even with an online bulletin board, have them introduce themselves, give them a fun warm-up that is, I always love a motto, right? I want to introduce the idea of a motto. If you were to say your sort of food motto, what would be your motto? Just something fun, something light, that lets people sort of ease their way into a category that you spend 80 hours a week thinking about and they spend about 12 seconds a week thinking about. Then you want to sort of create, so that's part 1 is sort of, I like to call it establish human connection. Part 2 would be setting context. Give yourself a moment to ease people into the category more deeply and also give yourself the opportunity to get some really, really juicy insights. That's like some of those questions I talked about. Then you can get into, hey, I want to introduce an idea for a new product for you. Tell me what is your perspective on this? Start broad. Again, always start broad, always start unaided. Okay, great. That's interesting. This concept included these 5 ideas. Which of these ideas is most compelling for you? And then let's say you have a question. Do people understand what MCT oil is? Right? Let's say you have that question. Do unaided, and then lead. Hey, this concept talks about MCT oil. Please tell me what you know about it. Really, so the way I like to think about a discussion guide is an inverted triangle. Broad, unaided, narrow, and then very pointy about what you want to get across.
And can you just explain again what aided versus unaided is?
Sure. Aided is when I say, what's important for me to know about feeding a toddler? Like all I'm saying, I'm not, and then that's unaided. Aided might be, to what degree is milk an important part of feeding a toddler?
Okay, got it.
So that's being very, very specific. Being specific about what you're asking. But what I would say is be very careful about giving consumers examples. So let me just say that again. What's important for you about feeding a toddler? For example, milk, vitamins, nutrients, low sugar. If you give people examples, they will choose one of those examples and read it back to you.
Okay. So let's do a hypothetical example, and then let's do a live design for a study. Does that sound like fun?
Oh, fun. Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, perfect. So, let's say so right now I'm drinking like a hydration drink. It's like a mix. Let's say I want to launch my own product in that category. I don't really know a lot about it, but I've been excited about it. I've been drinking it. Okay. So, let's say I'd done some of that research online. I, snuck my way into Mintel report, and now, okay, I have a decent understanding of who consumers are. So now, if I'm lucky enough to work with Sara Schor on this project, now we're getting to the point where we're designing a qualitative study. So I go in and I've created my discussion guide with you that, warms people up. I've put in a little warm up question, that is around, yes, what's your, I don't know, favorite sports team? I don't know who, like something kind of loosely related to the category, to warm people up, maybe around, your favorite color of Gatorade to get drenched onto a coach after they win. I don't know. And then we start getting into some of the questions. So we would start really broadly then with the first kind of questions so then it could be like, what would be a good opening question?
Yeah. Well, of course, Daniel, I'm going to sort of come back to you and say, what is your objective?
Right.
What will you do? What is your objective of the study, and what will you do with the results?
My objective from this would be to give me insights to come up with good branding, basically to appeal to people who are interested, let's say, in, high hydration, low sugar products.
Great. I love it. So what I might do is, I think one thing is really interesting is, what does hydration mean to people? So, what I would maybe start off with is, hey, I'd like to introduce you to my new friend, Zoe from Mars. And she's learning English for the first time, and she hears people use the word hydration. How would you define the word hydration? Great. Now tell me about 3 different occasions in your life where you might need hydration, right? Because hydration could be, I'm so thirsty. I'm quenching thirst. Hydration could be replenishment. Hydration could also be like, I'm hot and I'm using it to cool down, right? So again, you are so embedded in the category that I think we want to understand, what do people mean by that? Then I might say, talk to me about brands that provide hydration. Great. Okay, great. Give me 3 different brands. And for each of these brands, what about them? What do you know about these brands or these products that are hydrating? So I might ask that. Then I might say, I want you to imagine you're creating an ad for the perfect, or even better, I want you to imagine that you are going to create the perfect hydration drink or the perfect hydration product. What would it be called? What would be in it? What would be my experience of consuming it? And then give it a tagline. Now, consumers are clearly not creating the ad, but what we start to understand is, what are the product benefits? What are the functional benefits? And what are the emotional benefits? Sometimes I might even have them draw the ad, or say, you're going to get a famous illustrator to draw the ad. What would the illustrator draw? So the question is, will they draw somebody in the desert, or will they draw somebody finishing a marathon? That will give you really amazing insight into what people mean by hydration. Then I take Daniel's drink. Hey, I'd like to introduce you to a concept, for a new idea. Oh, I'd probably also talk about, I'd probably do some sort of exploratory around benefits before we're still unaided, right? I still haven't introduced Daniel's famous hydration drink. I might say, hey, here are 10 potential benefits that a hydration drink could provide you. I want you to pick the 3 that are most important to you in your lifestyle and tell me why. What about this connects to your lifestyle? And importantly, what is it about your lifestyle that makes this important? Because you always want to tie functionality to real lifestyle utility, to the human, right? This might be someone like, I see myself as a huge, a high performer. And because I'm a high performer, I want a high performance drink. That's a great insight. And then you get to, once you've done all that, I'd like to introduce you Daniel's amazing hydration drink. It has this, this, and this. It comes in these flavors. On a scale of 1 to 10, again, not quantitative, but it helps you get some guidance. How interested are you in buying this? Tell me about your score. How do you think Daniel's amazing hydration drink is different than the other drinks out there? What was most compelling to you about Daniel's hydration drink? What was the most important thing I told you about Daniel's hydration drink? I want you to imagine you were telling a friend about Daniel's hydration drink. What would you tell them? If Daniel was looking for you for advice on how to make his hydration drink better, what would you tell them? So there you go. So, going from the human, getting to know the human, talking about just the concept of the product, getting into the category, getting down to your product, and then getting really into the minutia of the idea.
That was amazing. I just wanted to be quiet and listen because that was gold. That was so interesting. Okay. And then now I get all that. They'll say, okay, so Sara has recruited some awesome people on the, cheap and cheerful side for me to help us manage our costs. And then now I have the results from 15 people. I have 15 videos and transcripts. What do I do with all of that? How do I get to the answer?
I love that. And it's funny, Daniel, I think I mentioned to you that I'm actually creating a moderator training, and to launch this fall. And it's funny that, I've spoken to a lot of my colleagues because that's something when you've just been doing this for so long that you do naturally. And it's so hard to put in writing, which has been funny. So I've been talking to a lot of colleagues about this. So it's very timely. I think the first thing you need to do is think about all of the facts. And when I say facts, like, what did you hear people say? What did you see? What did you observe? What did you hear? What did you listen to? And what did you hear? And the first thing I would say is look at the themes and the patterns. What are the themes that you hear a lot? What are the themes and the patterns that keep coming up? As you noticed when I did that, that faux Daniel's hydration drink, discussion guide, I kind of asked the same question 3 different times, 3 different ways. That is definitely a rule of thumb. Cause you had one question, right? What do I need to know to create brand strategy around this? And you want to ask your biggest strategic question as many ways as possible. First of all, so you make sure you get the depth and the richness and the dimension, but also so you get what I like to call strongly held beliefs. In research, it's very easy for people to give you a weakly held belief. If you ask the question multiple different ways, it requires, you can see what really is a strongly held belief versus just a one-off comment. And that's the same thing in quantitative. I never want to use one data point. I want to have several data points that lead me toward an answer or show me where there might be tensions and contradictions. But so the first thing you want to do is look at how can you cluster the themes and start to connect the dots? One question I always like to say is, what's answering my strategic questions? I like to ask, what surprised me? Where do I see a tension in people's lives? And this is one, it's a little bit of a tongue twister, but what does what they're saying say? Like my very favorite example of this in the entire world is I was doing research for a reality show, a network that has a ton of reality shows. And I was listening to people talk in focus groups and they were saying, they're all really nice people. I was down in the South and they're all like, oh, we're so pleasant. We're so pleasant. And I remember this woman said, she threw an apple at that girl's head. And there are people in my world, I kind of want to throw an apple at their head. And what this said to me was, people in general are taught to be nice and taught to be kind and taught to not throw at but they have an alter ego where they just want to tell that annoying colleague just to shut up. And experiencing shows like Real Housewives, which wasn't the show, but it allows them to feed their alter ego. And that was a pretty big aha for my clients at the time and really helped them design marketing for their programming. But I think you want to think about what people are saying saying? And what does that mean to you? And what does that mean for your objectives? And then what does that mean for your decision-making processes? One thing I like to say is try not to get caught up in all of the things you heard. One thing I always tell junior folks when they're going to write a report is tell your grandmother the big ahas you had. It will, or like, here are the top 5 things I think I should do. Start with the end. If you have experienced this research and if you are coming at it from a very present place, a very sort of curious place, a very place of being mindful and open and letting go of your expectations, if you're listening to it, you will hear the themes. You will have these ahas percolating. You will have the blinding glimpse of the obvious. It will be very clear to you. And that is what you need to glom onto is that so what, or that, oh my gosh, that makes sense now. You will have those ahas if you listen with curiosity and openness in a way that is really, really respectful and having compassion for the consumer and what their life is like and how your product could fit into it.
We'll be right back. Did you know that Startup CPG has an official in-store demo partner? I'm really excited to announce our partnership with Grassroots Marketing. They are awesome for early brands. They have no minimum number of demos, they've got national coverage, and you get full reporting analytics. They work with the big guys like Whole Foods and Sprouts, but also the tastemakers like Central Market, Mother's Market, and they're actually the official demo partner for Erewhon. For the Startup CPG community, there's an introductory rate of $180 for a 3-hour demo for the first 3 months. That'll help you get started, and then their rate goes up to $200. Again, there's no minimum number of demos. That is a huge differentiator because some other agencies I've talked to want you to do an enormous number of demos for each store that you try and a total number of demos that can just be way out of your budget range. It's really hard to find a good demo partner when you're a growing brand. Grassroots is a great one. If you'd like to chat with their team, email hello@grassrootsdemos.com and ask for the Startup CPG community discount, or connect with Bridget or David on our Slack channel or LinkedIn. And now, back to the show. Okay, so that makes sense. So, whether it's you doing it or, me trying to do it, basically like coming back with, looking at all the responses, probably making some notes along the way, and then coming back with what are the big takeaways here? What was surprising? What was different than I thought? What really stood out to people? What did I learn from this? Those are the kind of...
It's a juicy aha. And I think aha is a really important way to think about an insight. And what I mean by juicy, and it's funny, when I first started my company, I actually wanted to name my company Juicy Insights, but I was talked out of it. But I do love the idea of, because a juicy aha has energy to it. It's robust. It's not just here's something I learned. It gets you energized. It has this sort of dimension and inspiration. And sort of once you get this insight, you're like, oh my God, I know what I need to do. Hold the phone, stop the presses. This is creating action. And that's really what you want to get.
That's amazing. I can totally relate to that. And just about anything that has ever piqued my curiosity of just like, oh yeah, let's get into this. What's that all about? I've had that feeling so many times.
That's right. And it's hard. And I've been doing this for 20 years. It's a learned skill. But again, I came back to that idea of listening superbly. And if you listen, you're not on your phone and you're not, multitasking, and you're letting go, and you're just being sort of really open to what comes, the opportunity to have that aha is it's waiting for you. It's there for the taking.
Amazing. Okay. So, maybe just to close out here, I thought it'd be cool. Maybe each of us can try to remember one cool insight anecdote or one aha that we came up with that really resonated for, a client. And I can go first on one that I remember where
Please.
I was running a quantitative survey for a brand, and they were considering putting a claim or some kind of call out on the front of pack. And it was super interesting because, we had about, 5 or 10 to test, and I forget, where this one claim came from, but it was like, oh yeah, maybe why don't we throw that in there as well and try and test this one. And it was specifically around made in the USA. Really was not obvious that would be important to people. And then we ran the test, digital shelf with price points, checking different price points. And that study started as a pricing study, but it ended as, oh my God, you need to put this on your pack. For that specific category, this particular product, it made such a bonkers difference in terms of purchase intent. And of course, output of it, they put it on the pack, and, it's a great company and a great brand anyways, but oh my God, they did so well. They brought in so much incrementality into the set, so many new consumers, people really trusted their product. And then they ended up taking over categories and sections for many retailers and just was a huge success story. So, I just think back on like, gosh, I wonder if I don't remember who added that one made in the USA claim into the study, but like, gosh, what if it hadn't been in there? So that was a really fun one to work on. Do you have any aha moments like that?
Yeah, yes. I'm going to go back to the one I brought up with the ESPN one, because this is definitely a favorite one. And we were talking to women, and one thing that we talked to a lot of women who played sports. And this was a long time ago before people, it's so funny. Like the WNBA has got, and women's basketball is just, women's sports in general are having a renaissance right now. Maybe not renaissance, because renaissance means it's coming back, but like it's very, very exciting to see how women's sports are gaining the respect and the enthusiasm that they deserve. But when we did this 15 years ago, like no one was talking about women's sports at all. And I remember we were talking to a bunch, what we found quantitatively is that that fandom and having participated in sports in high school and college, there was a correlation, which makes a ton of sense. And so we went and spoke to a lot of ex-athletes, women in their 20s and 30s who had played in college and in high school. And when we listened to them, we heard so much about how, when you're in school, sports are so much part of your curriculum, and they're so much part of your life, and your teammates are your besties, and, you play every day. And then once you get, you become an adult, you're working and you're keeping a home and you're dating, or you're in a relationship and you're cooking and you're doing all the things that you do when you're adulting. And it's harder to find a pickup volleyball game, right? Or a pickup field hockey game, or even, even a pickup tennis game is hard in real life. And what we found was, though, in their lives and in their careers, they still held those values of being an athlete, of determination, of competition, of hard work, of teamwork. And that as well, the relationship to being a sports spectator also brought out those qualities in them. That it brought them back to those qualities. It brought them back to that experience of playing. And so we came up with this soundbite. It's always amazing to have a soundbite. It gets people excited. But we came up with this soundbite called "Once an athlete, always an athlete, and once an athlete, always a fan." And it was a big, big actionable insight. And again, I will say, if you ever have stakeholders, investors, they love a juicy soundbite. They love a soundbite. So find soundbites.
I love it. That's so interesting, especially I think, now that we're seeing such a surge in interest in women's sports, just that's a really interesting insight to think about. And I think I've heard this on a lot of different topics in different ways, but just about like, leaning into things that resonate with you for whatever reason. And when you were talking earlier about alter egos, I was thinking about it too, because I was like, I know you were talking more about reality shows. I was thinking more of Curb Your Enthusiasm, if you ever have watched that one.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, totally.
Because I'm like, I think that's why a lot of us like it his character is such an alter ego for so many of us. That's like,
yes.
That like
he says exactly what's on his mind.
Exactly. And like you can see yourself in that. And it's fun to imagine what it would be like to just live your life that way. And it was cool hearing him on a recent podcast interview. He was on Smartless, and just hearing him talk about that. And then also probably that was the first time I'd ever heard him talk at length and like experience his personality a little bit differently from how it is on the show. The main thing that surprised me is hearing him laugh on it, where there's just like a head back, like, oh, like where you've never heard that on a show. So anyways, not related to consumer insights.
You know what I just learned? Did you know that Larry David created the George Costanza character as a mirror of himself?
Yes. Okay, I've heard him. I've heard him say that. Yeah, I think I must have. Either I heard him or Jerry Seinfeld on, I don't know, or watched some show that they were on. And I had heard that a little bit. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Which all of those characters, though, are like people you can just totally relate to.
Amazing. I was thinking about insights and how illustrative they could be and how much they can really inspire an idea. Now, there are a lot of agencies that can say that they worked on the Dove Real Beauty campaign. But the agency I worked at, Sterling Brands, actually did the original Real Beauty strategy. Again, lots of agencies claim it. But we did a ton of research for that. And I will tell you the insight that we came out with was, I'd rather look happy and healthy than flawless and perfect. And I'm looking for a beauty brand that understands that. And if you think about that, this is when Dove was transitioning from like a soap and, believe it or not, antiperspirant and dish soap brand to being more of a beauty, to be more in the beauty category. The question was that the client smartly asked was, what is our brand of beauty? Which is where we got to Real Beauty. But this idea of looking like how I feel rather than looking like how I'm supposed to, and respecting the flaws, respecting the reality of my appearance. Obviously, Ogilvy, which was the agency that took over that campaign, just ran with it and just did amazing things with it. So a juicy insight can also really, really define your brand point of view.
I don't know so much about the beauty category, honestly, but I'm trying to remember what the output of that looked like. I remember some ads around Dove that were more like really like body positivity, like they weren't typical models in the ads that you would see, but it was
That's like exactly just right.
Like, but very like, I would say happy and, wholesome and healthy looking people in the ads.
It was just women of real body types. I mean, in underwear, which was like very bold and bossy, very bold and brassy, and very much a point of view. But they had a lot of creative with women with freckles. And they were probably one of the first brands to show women with gray hair, not for anti-aging, right? They were very, very inclusive. They were very inclusive in terms of people of color, in terms of people with flaws, quote unquote flaws. People with, who weren't like this perfect size 2, 5'9" blonde, that you were seeing with the L'Oreals and Olays of the world way back when. And they've really translated that into a beautiful point of view around self-esteem and personal body and image positivity. And that is just like such a gorgeous brand that just has a very strong point of view. But brand strategy is a whole nother podcast.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to do that one again. Well, Sara, thank you so much. It's always so interesting to talk to you. Certainly for me as somebody who's really interested in consumer insights, and I would say like just the stuff is stuff that I have no idea about. So it's just really, really interesting to learn. And just like, like now, I don't work for a brand now. I have obviously for like 10 years in the past, but it just makes me like itching, raring to go to like, oh yeah, we could do this kind of a study and come up with the killer insight and launch the new brand. So it's very inspiring to hear about all of that. And just, for anyone who wants to connect with you, do you mind just, giving your details out? Is it best to like get in touch with you on LinkedIn or your website, or to handwrite you? Or
No, absolutely. So my website is S as in Sam, C Charlie, HOR Insights. So Schor Insights, but spelled SCHOR. And anybody's welcome to email me. It's Sara, no H, SARA at shorinsights.com, SCHORINSIGHTS.com.
And just ballpark range. If someone's trying to work.
Oh, no, you can't do that to me.
Just maybe you could give it like, if someone wants to work with you on some kind of an insights study, is it going to cost them like, $100,000? Is it going to cost them $2,000? Like,
I would never do that. First of all, I would never do that to someone. If you're in a startup position, you're like, oh my God, I just did a, $200 million exit. We might develop a program that's more of a, robust program. But if someone's coming and like, hey, I have $5,000, I have $8,000. What can we do? I will always work with somebody to make it work. We'll figure out how scrappy, how cheap and cheerful we need to be. But I think it's hard to do something for under $5,000 because you do have to compensate people.
Yeah.
Right. And, if you imagine you're going to have 20 people, you're paying them $150 each, already there's money.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So yeah.
All right. That I always find it just helps people to understand the ballpark that they're in. They're like, oh, am I in a 6-figure ballpark? Thank you for the transparency.
I will tell you, Daniel, after I did the last webinar with you, a gal called me and she was creating a really cool coffee product. And I just gave her a few hours for free coffee. I mean, I am super respectful of entrepreneurs. I am super happy to support people. So if someone needs a brain to pick for an hour or two, we could do a food barter.
You are the best, Sara. That's amazing. I whenever this goes live, I would get ready for a bunch of emails of people offering their CPG products. So thank you again. Always a delight to chat with you, and hope everybody has learned as much as I have today.
Great. Thanks so much, Daniel. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast today, it would really help us out if you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I am Daniel Scharff. I'm the host and founder of Startup CPG. Please feel free to reach out or add me on LinkedIn. If you're a potential sponsor that would like to appear on the podcast, please email partnerships@startupcpg.com. And reminder to all of you out there, we would love to have you join the community. You can sign up at our website, startupcpg.com, to learn about our webinars, events, and Slack channel. If you enjoyed today's music, you can check out my band. It's the Super Fantastics on Spotify Music. On behalf of the entire Startup CPG team, thank you so much for listening and your support. See you next time.